Welcome to Singing Creek Educational Center. I've put out for you a bunch of things here that are some of the kinds of things Lewis and Clark would have brought with them on their journey all the way to the west to the Pacific Ocean from 1804 to 1806 and the return journey. Hi everyone, I'm Karen with Singing Creek Educational Center, and I'm so glad you could join us today for our March curriculum on mapping and observing, and also the Lewis and Clark expedition. So we're really excited to share with you our fun curriculum. Today, Brooke and I are here at the Snap House, and she's going to help us learn a little bit more about Lewis and Clark. And I have set out for you some trade items, some of the things that Lewis and Clark brought with them on their journey, not just for themselves to use, but to give away and make as presents to the Indians that they met. We also have next to us today, this is a replica of the flag that they had in 1803 when the country was new. Remember, Thomas Jefferson, the president at that time, asked Meriwether Lewis to lead this expedition all the way to the west, to the Pacific Ocean, to try to find a water route. Hopefully, they were looking for a river that would lead them all the way to the west. They didn't find that, of course. And Meriwether Lewis knew he couldn't do this journey on his own. He knew that he needed help, and he remembered William Clark, a captain that he served under in the military. And he asked Clark to help him and co-lead this expedition, and Clark agreed right away. So they set out and they put together a military party, a whole bunch of different men. We know the only woman that went on the trip was Sacagawea, and she was a Native American woman who was the wife of a man named Charbonneau, who was a French-Canadian trapper that Lewis and Clark met just a little ways into their journey that first winter when they stayed at a place called Fort Mandan that they built with the Mandan Indians. They met Toussaint Charbonneau there and his young wife, who was pretty young at that time, about 16. And when they set out the next spring with the Corps of Discovery, that's the expedition members, Charbonneau and his wife, Sacagawea, went along. And so let's take a look real quick at the flag from 1803 that they had. So this is a replica, and that means it's a modern copy. And this is pretty big. I'm gonna hold it up for you. You can see here that they have a ring of 13 stars. There were only 13 states in the United States back then. So this is what the flag would have looked like. And they brought some of these flags with them to fly on poles on their keel boat, so everyone would know it was a military expedition, and also to give as presents to the Native Americans. They brought a lot of things with them. And they brought a lot of presents because they knew that they would be meeting a lot of Indian tribes on the way. Some of the things they would have brought were metal goods. So we also have here a replica of a peace medal. So they brought these peace medals to give to the Indian chiefs. On the back is two clasped hands, like a handshake. And these were like big coins, and they put them around their necks. They brought all kinds of things like ribbons and bells. Near the end of their journey, when they had very little trade goods left, they would even cut the buttons off of their beautiful coats to trade. And they ended up even trading some of their beautiful military coats and things with the native people. So we have another replica here of what one of the captain's coats would have looked like. So all kinds of things like guns, gunpowder, mirrors, metal things, metal pots, all kinds of stuff that were new to the natives. And native people helped them out a lot, not only with directions of what they were going to find along the way, but food when they were really hungry. And we know that on their way, they met with the Shoshone native people who actually helped them out by giving them the horses they were going to need to cross the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains were something they were not prepared for. They thought they would find some small hills or maybe small mountains, and instead they were this giant mountain range. So horses were very important because they could not bring their canoes over the mountains. So Native people also provided them with shelter, let them stay with them for weeks on end, and just a lot of valuable things they got from the Native people. Lewis and Clark, unfortunately at the time, didn't really understand all of the different customs and traditions that the Native people had. Sometimes they made mistakes and they made a blunder, or they did something wrong and they may not have realized it. So when they're writing their journals and keeping notes of all the things that happened to them, you can sometimes see in the way that they describe what happened that maybe they didn't really know what long-standing traditions the Native people had. And of course, this country was not uncivilized country. You might hear that a lot, that it was uncivilized. The natives had been there a long, long time, and the native tribes say they've been there from time immemorial, which means basically forever. So the Native people had been there a long time, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They had established trade routes, they had government, they had ceremonies, traditional regalia, that means clothes, outfits that they wore. They had areas that were kind of like their territory. And so a lot of these things Lewis and Clark didn't understand. And the Native people are still here today. There are still many Native people in this country, and many of them are working to reclaim their languages, their ancestral homelands and cultures. Native people have vibrant cultures and histories that we can appreciate and acknowledge and learn from. So today we are going to be reading a little bit about the journey from the point of view of the dog that went along with them. Let's get to the book. All right, everybody, so we're going to read our story, and Brooke wants to come up here and say hi and be on camera. You ready, Brooke? Want to come say hi to our friends? Now, Brooke is the history dog. Come on, sweetie. She's got on her little pioneer outfit today for you all. She's going to model her pretty pioneer dress. Say hi to everybody, Brooke. We're going to be reading to you a story from the point of view of the dog that went on the journey. So the dog is a big black Newfoundland breed, and we're going to learn more about him. His name was Seaman, and he was a dog that belonged to Lewis, Meriwether Lewis, on the journey. What do you think, Brooke? Are you ready to hear a story with our friends? All right, she's going to sit down here on the floor, but she'll be listening as we read Seaman's Journal, On the Trail with Lewis and Clark. And this is by Patricia Reeder Eubank. All right, are you ready? Oh, there's a beautiful map inside here of the Lewis and Clark journey, right in the opening pages. You can see the long journey they went on. It was about 8,000 miles from the start all the way to the finish when they came back, and over 2 years of travel. So there's a nice watercolor painting of Seaman the dog. Let's hear what the Lewis and Clark journey was like for him. And there he is. Look at how bushy and thick his fur is. He's a very big dog, almost like a small bear who's so big. And this breed is still around today. Some people own big black Newfoundland dogs like this. So in the beginning, there's a word from Seaman. My name is Seaman. I am a male dog from Pennsylvania, and Meriwether Lewis paid $20 for me. I am a Newfoundland. I have 2 coats of fur, a thick, soft undercoat and a long, silky outer coat, so I never get cold. I love water and have big, furry, webbed feet, which makes me an excellent swimmer. I weigh almost 150 pounds. We Newfoundlands love children and are very loyal. I will protect my master with my life. Here is my story of the greatest adventure a dog ever had when I followed Lewis and Clark all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back again. Look, there he is as a puppy. He's pretty cute. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 1803. I have a new master, Captain Meriwether Lewis. We are in Pittsburgh waiting for our keel boat to be built. President Jefferson chose Lewis to be in charge of an expedition called the Corps of Discovery. We are to find a route to the Pacific Ocean. I am in charge of Lewis. Fort Wood, Missouri, April 1804. So this is April, the next spring. Lewis and I have been here for the past 9 months. I've hauled barrels of flour, cornmeal, sugar, salt, coffee, apples, and hard biscuits. Lewis has studied maps and books about fossils, plants, and medicine. We have packed shiny bracelets, scissors, medals, mirrors, army uniforms, hats, and flags to trade with the Indians. Sometimes Lewis and I study the stars all night. St. Charles, Missouri, May 14th, 1804. Lewis, along with his best friend and co-leader William Clark, 31 men and I are off. In a pouring rain, we push the 55-foot keelboat and 2 pirogues, which are flat-bottomed dugout canoes, into the Missouri River. We travel upriver, and the men must push against its strong current. Camp along the Missouri River, May 22nd, 1804. A party of Kickapoos came into our camp. We gave them trinkets. They gave us deer meat. The men were so hungry, there was almost nothing left for me. Along the Missouri River, May 23rd, 1804. Most days, Lewis and I walk along the riverbank as Clark steers the keelboat. Often, huge flocks of passenger pigeons block out the sun. Lewis sketches them in his journal, while I look out for rattlesnakes. While I was splashing in the muddy river chasing after fish, Lewis fell off a limestone cliff. Luckily, he caught himself on a ledge and was saved. From now on, I'll keep my eye on Captain Lewis. At the Kansas and Platte River, June to July, 1804. There are many beavers here. There are also some nasty-tempered badgers. I love to pounce at the prairie dogs or barking squirrels as they pop their heads out of the ground. My favorite animal to chase is the squirrel. When I catch one, I take him to cook. He is glad to get it. Missouri River, north of the Platte River, August 1804. The Otto and Missouri Indians invited Lewis and Clark to a council meeting where I helped Clark pass out coats, blankets, flags, and medals. Lewis spoke of peace and explained that the French and Spanish had sold the land to a new great father, the President of the United States. Mornings are cooler now and the geese are flying south. Today we saw our first coyote or prairie wolf. Look at these beautiful images of the Native Americans. Big Sioux River, August 25th, 1804. We heard an Indian legend about the Spirit Mound. The legend says men only 18 inches tall with huge heads live at the mound. Lewis, the men, and I started across the prairie. It was so hot that Lewis sent me back, but the men walked for 3 hours before reaching the mound. They saw no men, but buffalo covered the prairie. I spent the afternoon lying in a cool riverbank. A hot, dry prairie is no place for a Newfoundland. On the plains of the Dakota, September 1804. I trail Lewis up steep hills and down deep valleys. We've seen bobcat, elk, buffalo, and antelope. I chased the antelope and took one to cook. One day we counted 36 bald eagles soaring above our heads. Wow, look at all these beautiful animals that they discovered. Lewis was the one that collected most of the specimens to bring back to Thomas Jefferson, specimens of plants and animals that were new to science. They weren't new to the Native Americans though, but they were certainly new to the white men that had never been there before. Off Teton River, September 1804. We named this river Teton River but the Teton Sioux call it Bad River. The only thing bad are the manners of the Sioux. They carried my master on a painted buffalo robe to their camp. They placed him on a white buffalo skin where he smoked the peace pipe with the council chiefs. When we started toward our boat to leave, the Sioux grabbed the boat's rope to stop us. They wanted tobacco and our pirogue. When Lewis threw tobacco at the chief, they let us go. I was glad to get away. The Sioux eat dogs. That was a tense moment they had, where the native people expected them to pay a little bit more to pass that part of the river. Then Lewis and Clark didn't understand how much was required to pass their part of the river there. Village of the Arikaras, October 9th, 1804. The Arikaras are farmers and shared beans, corn, and squash with us. The men were glad for the vegetables, but this is not good food for seamen. The Arikaras' children played games with Clark's servant York. He pretended he was a lion and roared at them. They pretended they were scared and ran away. I pretended I was on guard and barked. What fun we had. Here's a picture of that. Some of the native people, the Sioux and the Arikara. York went along on the journey as a slave. He was Captain Clark's slave, and some of the tribes had never seen a black man before. He was considered big medicine because for many of those tribes, when the warriors were successful in battle, when they had achieved great honors, they would paint the black paint on their faces and their bodies. That was the ash, the soot from the fire. And that would say that they were very powerful. So when they saw York and tried to touch his skin and to see that the black didn't come off, they thought that he was big medicine or very powerful. So in this way, the Indians were very interested in him. Fort Mandan, November 1804. It is very cold. My fur keeps me warm, but the men suffer. We have met the Mandan and the Hidatsa tribes. Both are peaceful farmers. The men have built a camp and named it in honor of the Mandans. A French-Canadian fur trader named Toussaint Charbonneau came into camp, and Lewis hired him as interpreter and cook. His Shoshone wife, Sacagawea, is about 14. Her name means bird girl. Charbonneau is a good cook and shares his meat with me. Now they're still in Fort Mandan, and now it's December 25th, 1804. You know what happens on December 25th, maybe. We had a Christmas party. The men played tambourines, fiddles, and trumpets. Even the Mandans danced. We all had a great time. Then it's January and February of 1805. The snow is very deep. The men hunt deer and rabbit for food, and they hollow out trunks of cottonwood trees and make canoes. Often Lewis and I visit the Mandan and Hidatsa who live close by. They tell him about the route over the mountains, and Lewis writes it all down in his journal. Now they're still in Fort Mandan. It's February 11th, 1805. I helped Sacagawea dig roots to eat. She also gathers plants for medicine. One day she made pemmican and gave me a piece. I ate the dried meat in it, but spit out the nuts and berries. Phooey! Sacagawea is a mom now, and I have a baby to watch over. She named her baby Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Clark calls him Pompey or Pomp. Will he call me Uncle Seaman? On the Missouri River, April 1805, so it's April now, it's spring. While we camped, the men made pets of buffalo calves and a litter of wolf pups. My master sent a progress report to President Jefferson. He also sent mountain sheep horns, buffalo skins, Indian gifts, bleached skulls, 4 live magpies, that's a kind of bird, and a prairie dog. We are traveling the river again, 31 men, 1 woman, a baby, and 1 Newfoundland who is glad to be rid of those pesky magpies. Here's pictures. Some more animals and specimens Lewis sent back. Speaking of the skull he sent back, we have here a black bear skull. And this is kind of an old copy. This is a real one, but it's really old. It's kind of falling apart, but gives you the idea that, you know, one of the things that Lewis did was collect specimens of animals new to science and send them back. And this is a black bear skull. Black bear was one of the things that was, grizzly bear too, was new to science. So the men had encounters with grizzly bears, as we'll see. At the mouth of the Yellowstone River, April to May 1805. So many buffalo, antelope, and elk roam here. One day, 2 grizzly bears attacked us. Lewis shot and wounded one. He ran away, but the other chased us until Lewis shot him. The grizzly's paws were 11 inches wide, with 7-inch claws. Then a mean old beaver bit my leg. I bled so much that Lewis thought I would die, but my master saved me. I can't die. I have an expedition to guard. Now they're camping on the Missouri River, May 14th, 1805. Sacagawea is a hero. Lewis and I were walking along the water's edge while the rest of the men were in canoes and pirogues. The wind came up, the sky turned black, lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the river began to churn. Charbonneau was in the lead boat with most of our supplies, but he lost control and the gear went overboard. Oh no! Sacagawea held Pomp with one hand, while with her other she scooped up all that she could reach. My master is heartbroken. His journal was lost, but my journal did not even get damp. So she saved a lot of their specimens and equipment that were very important. That was a wonderful thing she did. A quick thinking. She's so brave. May 29th, 1805. I am a hero too. Last night, while all the men were asleep, I heard a noise. Suddenly, a gigantic buffalo charged into camp, straight for Lewis's tent. I barked out, "Woof!" That buffalo turned around and headed back to where he came from. Lewis called me his brave dog. Now they're at the source of the Missouri River, August 1805. As Lewis and I walked near the river we named for President Jefferson, we found the source of the Missouri River. We drank from the small trickle of icy water that bubbled out of the ground. Now we know there will be no river route all the way to the Pacific Ocean. We will have to walk or ride horses over the Bitterroot Mountains, which we named for a bitter-tasting plant. Bitterroot. There's the little bitterroot flower down at the bottom of the page. They were a little bit bummed out that they couldn't make it all the way by water all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now they're at the Lemhi River, August 1805, so now it's late summer. Sacagawea told us how the Hidatsas had kidnapped her from the Shoshones when she was just a little girl. When we met up with a party of Shoshones, Lewis and Clark bought 30 horses from them. When we were led to Shoshone chief Kameawait, Sacagawea recognized him as her brother. Sacagawea cried with joy, and I cried too. What a happy reunion. Now they're in the Bitterroot Mountains, October 9th, 1805. Our guide, a Shoshone named Old Toby, had guided us in the mountains, but he has suddenly left us, and we wandered around lost for a whole day. During the past 2 months, we have walked through rain, sleet, and snowstorms. We met the Flatheads and traded for fresh horses. The men do not find game, and we are hungry for fresh meat. We drink melted snow and eat candles. We are even glad to have the soup that Lewis made and dried in St. Louis. That was a long time ago. That was like a year ago, practically, when he dried that soup in St. Louis, but boy, they're happy to have it when there's nothing else and you're in the snow and it's cold out in the mountains. Oh, the Columbia River, October 6th, 1805. So they found the Columbia. That's in Oregon. When we reached the western edge of the mountains, we met the Nez Perce, who have pierced noses and are friendly. They guided us, and Lewis left horses for our return trip with them. Now the snow has turned to rain, and there's fog day and night. The men portage around the river's rapids. That means they have to carry everything around the rapids, because the rapids were too dangerous to go down with their canoes. Pacific Ocean, November 7th, 1805. They finally see it. Last night we camped on a hill. This morning I heard the shout, "Ocean in view!" Imagine a dog from Pennsylvania standing at the Pacific Ocean. We are all happy. Fort Clatsop, December 1805. Now it's winter. The men have built a fort from the pine and fir trees. It rains constantly now, and many of the men wear the Clatsop's basket hats to keep their heads dry. We live on fish and whale blubber from the Chinook Indians. Clark works to complete his maps while Lewis studies the animals, especially the sea otter. Clark said we have come 4,142 miles from Missouri to the Pacific. It's a long way. Look it down at the bottom of the second page. It says lazy seaman. He's laying around a little bit in the wintertime. They were really lucky to have met the Clatsop and the Chinook, who traded with them and helped them out a lot with food and things. They were pretty hungry that winter, and it was very, very wet. It never stopped raining practically that whole winter. Columbia River, March 23rd, 1806. We are back on the river and heading home, finally, the next spring. April 1806. I was kidnapped by the Chinook, but my wonderful master sent 3 men to rescue me. He told them to shoot if necessary to get me back, but they let me go. I am glad to be back guarding my master. That may have been one of those misunderstandings we were talking about earlier. Bitterroot Mountains, May 1806. The snow in the mountains is still deep, and we had to turn back. For several days we stayed with the friendly Walla Walla Indians. Then we found the Nez Perce. They welcomed us, fed us, and returned the horses that we had left with them. They will guide us through the mountains as they did when we first crossed this land. Missouri River, August 12th, 1806. Now it's late summer again. Lewis and Clark split our corps into 2 parties to explore the Louisiana Purchase territory. It was hard for both groups. Lewis was hurt, and Clark's horses were stolen. We were glad when we were reunited. At the end of June, we said goodbye to the Bitterroot Mountains. We also said goodbye to Charbonneau and Sacagawea. Now Lewis and I walk the riverbank as usual, but I miss Sacagawea and Little Pomp. St. Charles, Missouri, September 21st, 1806. Late summer. The whole town turned out to greet us. They thought we had died in the wilderness. We did not die. We have been on the greatest adventure ever. Lewis will send a long report to President Jefferson about the Indian tribes, plants, and animals we discovered. Clark has mapped the lands we crossed. You can see there that Seaman and Little Pompey are having a hug to say goodbye. And I, Seaman, have brought my wise, brave, and dedicated master safely home. And then there's a little recipe for how to make Sacagawea's pemmican, which is kind of like what we think of as a granola bar. It's got nuts and berries and seeds, and they put a little dried meat in it too. Kind of like a combination between a granola bar and beef jerky. All right, and here is the map of the return expedition, showing all the way across the United States, all the way back to St. Louis, Missouri, from the Pacific Ocean. All right, what'd you think of that book? Did you like it, Brooke the history dog? She enjoyed it too. I'm glad that you watched and learned a little bit about the Lewis and Clark expedition and Seaman the dog. And if you ever see a big black Newfoundland dog that's shaggy and looks like it has a big head, kind of looks like a bear, you'll know that's the same kind of dog that went along on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Do you have a dog at home? What does your dog like to do? And what's your dog's name? Tell us all about it. Write it down and share it. Put it in your journal.